Welcome to the Sober Christian Gentleman podcast. This is Henry. I decided to do a podcast regarding the difference between lawful and legal because most people are very confused by this concept. They're confused because it's become confusing because the people who want to control you, the people who want to lie to you, the ones who want to deceive you, the ones who want to steal your stuff, imprison you, force you to do stuff. Those people want you to be confused between legal and lawful. And there's a very big difference. I'm going to explain it in this podcast. On with the podcast. We will begin with an opening prayer. God, give us the patience to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. God, give us discernment so we can see with clarity, followed by conviction, to act appropriately at all times and in all things. We ask that you bless us with the armor of God, cloak us with your divine protection, so that we may boldly walk in the world, to courageously be the peacemakers and make the world a better place for all your children. We ask that you move our hearts so that we know when to use the sword of the Spirit or the sword of steel to do right for ourselves, our families, and our communities. We ask that you move us in constitution to be humans who stand tall with courage, speak truth, and lead by example. We pledge on our sacred honor to rebuke evil, to speak out against evil, and to act to stop evil. We ask that you move our hearts so that we may know with absolute certainty the best way for us as individuals to act in our own way. In the power and in the name of Jesus Christ, we banish all negative entities, all evil spirits, all demons from our presence immediately. In the name of Jesus Christ, we command you, we compel you with the power of the Most High God to leave our presence for now and forever. Do not return, go now. In the name of Jesus Christ, we express with our full intention, with our freedom of choice, this area is now declared with the authority of Jesus Christ unequivocally, absolutely, totally clear of all evil entities, spirits, and energies. We say these things in Jesus' name. Amen. I thought I'd do a podcast on legal versus lawful because this is one of those trickery terms that people who want to deceive you want to use to make sure you don't know what's going on. Now, I'm going to put the definition that is commonly known for lawful and then legal. And even in the common dictionaries today, they want to confuse the two. They want to seem like they're synonymous, but they're not. This is the trick. Lawful is according to laws of nature. The laws of nature are pretty simple. There's karma involved with everything you do. So the simple law of nature that Jesus explained in the Gospels, and then went at length to try to get people to understand it, just in case you missed it the first time. And then right now you've got the fallen church who are trying to make sure people miss it because the church is on the wrong side of this thing, so they don't want you to know about it. Any good church will tell you this, and any church that's not telling you this, and if you confront your pastor and he avoids it, it means you're in the wrong place. That's not your peeps. So the definition of lawful is according to the laws of nature. What is the law of nature that God has put forward before us? It's simple. 3 words. Harm no one. It's as simple as that. I'll say it again. Harm no one. Now, this concept can be broken down to 3 subgroups for those who want to be a bit more specific or have specificity. The first one is harm no one. right? Again, it comes down to harm no one, nobody, don't hurt anybody, right? Cause no harm. Number 2 is harm no one's property. So don't damage someone else's property. Don't withhold their property from them. You have to allow them to have their property. It's theirs. It's their property. Harm no one's property. Number 3 is honor your word. That means if you say you're going to do something, you do it. Also, the reverse of that is, or the other way to say it is, do not engage in fraudulent contracts. So this simple 3-point spread of the simple 3-word phrase is natural law. Everything in nature obeys this law. And if they contradict this law in some way, then there's repercussions. There's karma that happens from it. Even when an eagle kills its prey, it's harming the prey. But the thing is the eagle knows it could die by doing that, but it does it anyway. Why? Because it needs to eat meat and it needs to eat its prey. So it's caught in a catch-22. Do nothing and it'll die. Do something, it could die. But there's karma either way. And this is the point of natural law. Natural law is that the world around us has karma. If you do something or don't do something, there's negative or positive repercussions both directions. And it gets nuanced and complicated really quickly. But only you can make your decisions for yourself, because only you have to deal with the consequences of your action or inaction. This is the beautiful simplicity of natural law. There's been other people since then, especially in the early American colonies, that push forward the idea of libertarianism. And you'll find a lot of libertarian writers were actually God-fearing Christians who wanted to get back to biblical principles, and they were tired of all the nonsense, either when they were dealing with the crown and the British royalty system, and then when they got down to the corrupt colony system that became the Republic of the United States, it became corrupted again. And then they were trying to put forward these simple rules to kind of reel in all the corruption that was going on. They had a great idea, they were trying to move it forward, and then all these double agents for the crown and double agents for private interests were in there getting elected to political office and then just screwing the place up for everybody. It's all about wealth redistribution, right? This is the whole point of slavery in the first part of the colonial years. It was there as a wedge issue to divide people so that they would fight, because most people don't want slavery around them. And even in the United States, at the height of slavery, only 3% of the entire population actually owned slaves. The rest of them had nothing to do with it. The problem is that because of politics, the southern states had their political people get into office and they legalized slavery and then made it compulsory. Just like compulsory military service in Israel today, they had compulsory slave service where you had to participate in slavery. You had to volunteer. Every third weekend, you had to volunteer to round up runaway slaves. And if you didn't volunteer to do that, they would charge you with a crime, and your punishment was to become a slave. It could be 5 years, 10 years, 20-year sentence to be a slave just because you didn't participate in the atrocity known as slavery. So this is the danger when people actually get in charge of the political system, because they warp everything to the point where it's unrecognizable, but then they use force to force you to do what they say, or they're going to stomp you into the ground. This is the danger, and that's why the people who are evil, the people who want to control you, always go towards legal, because legal is the opposite of lawful. Legal can be anything they want it to be. They just write it on a piece of paper, and it's legal, no matter how contradictory it is to natural law. And that's the point. See, legal, on the other hand, is anything they want it to be. Legal definitions are whatever they want to define the word as. They can reverse the meaning of the plain English traditional use of a word and just reverse it. They can make good bad. They can make bad good, right? The word notwithstanding is a simple word that when you hear the English definition, like, what does it mean? What does it mean, notwithstanding? It means to not withstand something. It means you fall over. You cannot hold it back. You cannot stop it. You can't withstand the thing because it's moving past you with momentum. And it's a futile effort to try to stop it. So the plain English definition is that you can't withstand it. You cannot. Now, the legal definition is the inverse. It's the opposite. It means notwithstanding means it withstands everything. It means you cannot push past this thing if it's notwithstanding, unless there's exceptions to the notwithstanding. So notwithstanding could mean notwithstanding everything except, and they'll give you a list of exceptions, right? So a lot of the times, specifically in the English world, because there was a reason for it, they brought in all this legislation and legal talk about residential tenancies. Now, residential tenancies usually have the words, like in the legal statutes and acts, they put the words notwithstanding in there because they want it to be the most powerful thing in that particular territory. So the statutes and acts that define the rights and privileges and all this stuff of residential tenants usually are notwithstanding anything else except some exceptions. So the highest form of protections in most common law jurisdictions since 1970 has been residential tenancy rights. These are the highest rights in the land from 1970 on for a particular purpose, because the powers that be wanted to make it strong to rent, as in don't own a house. It's better to actually be renting a house or a apartment because you have really strong legal rights, whereas if you actually own the property in title, you have less rights and less strength than you would if you're the renter. It gets very complicated and complex, and that's the point of it. And what it was favoring people who were not property owners over people who were property owners. So that was where notwithstanding came in. And this is one of those words that the plain English definition is notwithstanding means you cannot withstand it. You fall over. But the legal definition of notwithstanding means you stand straight no matter what's pushing on you. It's the opposite. And this is where getting into legal versus lawful is complex and obvious at the same time. Number one, legal is whatever they want it to be, which means that it's hard to keep track of it because it's so complex. Legally, they can redefine any word they want. They can redefine the word woman to mean whatever they want. They can redefine the word man to be whatever they want. They can redefine the word child to be whatever they want. They can redefine the word family to be whatever they want. So they can get away with a lot of what would be considered fraud becomes not fraud through the magic of legal. So if you just did something to defraud somebody, to harm somebody, to take property from them that you have no right to, that would be called fraud. But when the people who are the politicians do it, they go through this magical ceremony, they create this thing called legislation and regulations, and then when they do it, it's not considered fraud because through the magic of law. Like legal, right? See, lawful is really simple. It's do not harm anyone. If you harm anyone, there's repercussions. But legal, they can legally harm whoever they want, and there's no repercussions because they've made sure there's no legal repercussions for them legally harming people. There's karma repercussions, but legally there is no repercussions. So here's an example that's coming up lately. And what it is the redefinition of certain words. So as an example, the United Nations, which is a private members association, it's a private membership thing. It's not actually for the public, it's for a private membership to appear to be in control of things. And to qualify to be part of the private membership, you have to do all kinds of stuff. Pretend to be legally an authority for the particular country you claim to be having authority over, and basically go through this long magical ritual to make it seem like you're the guy in charge for that particular country at the seat of the table of the United Nations. So the United Nations has a subgroup called the World Health Organization, and the World Health Organization created something called the World Food Code. And the premise they were saying was that they had to do something about the food in the world to make it standardized because there's just too much garbage food and too many poisons in the food, and this is a problem. And they want to make it standardized so anywhere in the world you went, you would be able to find a similar food packaging formula, right? You'd be able to see in the package what's in the food, and all the words would mean the same thing from one country to the other country. And it seemed like, hey, if we just standardize this thing, people actually understand better what's in the food, and people would have a better diet by default because they'd have a better idea that when they see a word, it means the word that they're recognized from wherever country they came from. So they could travel the world and be resting assured that the word they see on the package is the same word from all over the world. This premise is a lie, but that's the premise by which they promoted it. And the whole point of this premise was to deceive people. And what they did with the deception was they redefined nutrients. The word nutrient in the plain English definition means it's a element within food that is nutritious for your body. It gives you health and vitality. It gives you calories and beneficial vitamins and minerals. That is what a nutrient is. It's actually beneficial for you. And then, so the plain English definition of nutrient is fairly straightforward. Everyone, when they hear the word nutrient, they know what it means. On the other hand, when you hear the word toxin, you know what the word toxin means. Toxin means things that are a deficit to your health, things that poison you, things that actually reduce your health overall, things that make you sick, things that actually reduce your vitality in life. You can die from poisons. If you have enough poisons, it'll kill you, that kind of thing. So toxins are basically poisons, right? It's poisons in the food. If there's a lot of toxicity in the food, you can actually die from having too much of these poisons in the food. So what the World Food Code did was switch those two words around. So they took the word nutrient and the word toxin and they reversed them. So now when you actually look at the World Health Food Code, the word nutrient means things that actually make you sick, things that will actually reduce your life, things that are actually will build up and kill you. They took the definition of toxins and stuck the word nutrient on it. Then they took the word nutrient and stuck the definition for toxins on it. They reversed it legally. So they legally declared this is the definitions we're using for the word nutrient and the word toxin. So after that point, everything they wrote was in the context of the newly defined words, which are the opposite of what everyone thought they meant. So now when they went on these campaigns of increasing nutrient content in foods and decreasing toxicity, it was the reverse of what you expect. So right away, they started mandating that the countries who signed up to the United Nations World Health Organization Food Code start, in reality, reducing the nutrient content of the foods and increasing the toxicity of the foods, which is right in line with the GMO program. Genetically modified foods have this already happening. Like genetically modified corn has a high level of toxicity in it and a low nutritional level. You can eat genetically modified corn all day long and starve to death. Why? Because there's very little nutritious value in it and there's a lot of toxicity, and even the calories you're getting are not the same calories. So it becomes very convoluted and confusing. So basically, whenever from that point on, which I believe was 2005 or 4 is when they actually declared it in the United Nations. And then all the different countries who are signatories to the United Nations, like the fake representatives anyways, had to make it law within their respective countries. And each country went through this dog and pony circus show where the local legislative assembly claimed to be doing this for the health and well-being, for the planet and the earth and everyone involved. And people who knew what was going on were protesting and saying, we do not want our food to be made toxic because you've reversed the definitions. We don't want less nutrition in our food and more toxins, because that was the promise. They were going to increase nutrition and decrease toxicity, which is the opposite of what... See, it gets so confusing because they've just reversed the rules, reversed the definitions legally. So it's legal schmigel, no problem. They'll never be held accountable because it's all according to the law. And they've actually put clauses in there where they will not be held accountable for the damage done by this particular procedure. And it's so frustrating as an outsider looking in, seeing, okay, this is just fraud. It's just fraud, right? And they're planning to murder people through poisoning the food supply and having them starve to death with little nutrition. So they're going to be eating constantly, but getting very little nutrition, and then getting all this toxic buildup, which is going to cause them to have all kinds of diseases, which they're going to no longer be at ease because they're going to get obesity and all kinds of weird things while they're starving to death. So there's all these collateral benefits, like Big Pharma, which is part of this shadow group. They get all kinds of benefits because people are now on medications for the rest of their short, miserable lives, trying to get over the fact that their food is now very low in nutrition and very high in toxicity. So around the world, each country that pretended to be going along with this program had people protesting year after year after year, saying, we don't want this, we don't want this. And what happened is the local government would back off. If there was a major protest with like 10,000 people, the government would just back off and then let it go till next year or till next session. And then what they'd do is they would relabel it and add it amongst another bill. And then they kept hiding it. It was like a shell game where they kept putting it in and putting it in and putting it in. And the countries that lasted the longest would have been, I think, might have been 6 years of rebranding, where they took the same wording for the legislation and they would do the shell game where they'd rebrand the act or statute, and then people would protest it because they knew what was going on. The government would back off, and then they would stick it as a rider in another bill, and then people would protest that too. And then they just kept adding it, and it was like a shell game where they're moving the shells around. You're trying to figure out where the peanut is. Is it in 1, 2, or 3? Is it in shell 1, 2, or 3? Where's the peanut, right? They're sliding it around, sliding it around, sliding it around. And people are like, we don't want this. And eventually, the people who were protesting gave up because they had to move on with life. So the protest went from 10,000 people. Next time it was 8,000 people. Next time it was 6,000 people. Next time it was 4,000 people. And until eventually, there was only 1,000 people showing up. The government's like, let's do it. And then they passed the law, and people are so tired of protesting this thing that they didn't want that they just gave up. And then now it's part of the food code. So now all the countries that signed up to this thing have highly toxic food with very little nutritious value, but when the government agents talk about, they're talking about increasing the nutritional value of food and reducing the toxicity. And it's very confusing because it's the words of the opposite. So whenever anyone tries to make a difference, they run up against these government bureaucrats who are using the new language that defines toxins as nutrients and nutrients as toxins. So if you try to actually file anything in the courts just throw your stuff out because they're like, this is stupid. This can't be real. And they just throw your case out for being frivolous and vexatious. And then they'll even nail you with all kinds of lawyers' fees. They might charge you $20,000, $30,000, $50,000 for having brought the case in the first place. So people do that, a couple times, and finally it's like, what's the point? The courts are not going to do anything. You're just getting fleeced by the system. They're just moving forward, and they know what they're doing. The people in the background know what they're doing, and the people in the foreground, most of them are useful idiots. They have no idea what they're really doing. And then the people who are wise are trying to make a difference, and they're running up against the system. But the system is there to protect the power structure, not actually do anything injustice. Like, they're not meant to actually do things that would be considered just in a normal, rational way. This is the point of legal. Legal is all about deception. They deceive in an organized, structured manner. And then they have the courts uphold their deception, pretending it's real when it's not. This is why I do not believe anyone's actually going to achieve anything meaningful going to court in their courts to try to reverse the atrocities going on. This is the point of legal. A group of powerful people get together and they just pay the right people off who draft legislation, which is just a big make-believe game. And then they have politicians who are bribed, and it's not legally calling bribe, it's called, there's a name for it where they're like, oh no, it's no problem, it's what's the name of it, where you go to a politician and you basically promise to do something for him if he does promise to do something for you. There's a name for this, where if you just actually gave him an envelope with money and said, I want you to do this, this is a bribe, that would be considered illegal. But if you do it the other way, where you just call it a different name, where legally it's allowed to bribe, you're allowed to bribe politicians as long as you call it the right name. Well, I'm at a loss for the name of it right now, but corporations do it all the time. Private groups do it all the time. Oh, lobbying, that's what it's called. So you can lobby a politician, which means you can promise them all kinds of money and benefits and reciprocal promises in the future. As long as you call it lobbying, it's totally all right. If you called it bribery, you'd go to jail, and he'd go to jail. This is what's amazing, is they've just redefined bribery legally. So if you legally call it bribery, doesn't matter if, if you legally call it lobbying rather than bribery, you get away with it. But if you call it bribery, you go to jail for it. And all it is just a redefinition of the word lobbying or bribery. They both have the same meaning. It's just that one is legally allowed and one is legally not allowed. It's all about perception management. So it gets convoluted and complex, but again, they're just legally redefining a set of circumstances. If there's a lake in front of you and you know it's an L-A-K-E, a lake, right? And it's just a natural water source that waterfowl use for breeding and drinking and eating and all that stuff, right? They can just legally redefine that lake as anything they want. And then there can be all kinds of repercussions for the newly redefined body of water. And this is where it gets convoluted and very irritating to anyone with common sense and anyone who has integrity, because now we're dealing with a dishonesty wrapped in legal framework that covers up the dishonesty, covers up the injury, and protects the people who are doing it in the cloak of legitimacy when it's not legitimate at all. The whole structure is illegitimate. So that's the point of legal. See, natural law is about honesty. It's about truth. It's about what is correct, no matter what you call it. That is lawful. That's why the term lawful defines as harm no one, or number one, harm no one, number two, harm no one's property, number three, honor your word. Those three things are important in lawful conduct because it gives you good karma and you are likely to have a good outcome. Now the thing is, the entire structure of politics is based on violating natural law through legal means. They do the opposite. Every politician you can think of harms people, harms people's property, and engages in fraudulent conduct. The difference is that they are protected by their system, so they'll never be held accountable legally. They've given themselves legal immunity, where you're not allowed to sue them for damages because they're protected legally. They have immunity that they've given themselves like magic. And it's not magic at all, it's just fraud in an organized way. It's a gangster enterprise. These people are gangsters. It's just that they pretend to be lawful, legal, schmeagle politicians and all that. But they're just taking positions of power and manipulating things to their benefit. It's all straightforward and simple. It becomes complicated when you don't understand the scam that's going on. The scam is there's powerful people who are controlling things, and it's in their interest to maintain deception. That's the point of this subterfuge or this obfuscation, is so that you can't actually see what's going on and the people around you don't know what's going on and you're all confused. Why? Because they've made it so. They've made sure the educational system, the compulsory, see, legally in the Western world, you have compulsory government education. What does that mean? It means they dumb you down in a very systematic and specific way so you can't actually think for yourself. People who think in terms of logic and reason are punished in this particular system. People who are rule followers and don't actually question authority are rewarded in the system. The ones that are the most rewarded, the most dedicated to the system, are given positions in society. They go through the university system, which dumbs them down even more. It makes them even more rule followers because now they got something to lose. They've got this little piece of paper that cost them their entire youth and a whole pile of money, and they're not willing to have that be lost for the sake of truth or righteousness, right? Or correct anything. They're a slave to that piece of paper from that point on. And they know just enough to know that if they actually deviate from the program, they will have that they will lose the privileges that come from that piece of paper, and it enslaves them into doing stupid things that are against their self-interest, and they actually destroy the society around them while trying to hold on to that piece of paper while the entire society burns. It's illogical, but they've been trained to not use logic. That's the point. People are rewarded to be moronic. They're rewarded to be stupid, and that's what ends up happening. These people don't realize they're participating in their own destruction, and they basically obey right to the end. Why? Because they don't know any better. They just have no idea that what they're doing is actually the worst possible thing for themselves, but yet they do it anyway. Why? Because they've been trained to be morons. They've been trained to be dummies, and they're rewarded for being dummies. That's the whole point of the operation. Until you understand that, nothing really makes much sense. So this is the point. The people who want to deceive you use legal means to deceive you. Why? Because they can redefine anything they want to be whatever they want. They can take what would be a crime and make it not a crime when they do it, because they've legally defined their actions as not a crime. Where if you did the exact same thing, but you're not part of their club, it would be called a crime, and you would be punished to the full extent of the law. Law and order. Law and order. They always say that. People say it all the time. Law and order. It's like, what does that mean? Law and order means whoever makes the laws are the powerful ones, and they get to decide when the laws are applied and when the order will be applied or upheld or ignored. Selective prosecutions. This happens all the time. You can tell when there's a leftist plot in play when the activists get to run around, destroy property, injure people, lie, deceive, and cause mayhem, and they're not actually criminally charged like a regular person would be. They're actually just selectively prosecuted to not be prosecuted. There's no prosecution there, right? Or they'll go through the song and dance of a prosecution, but then turn around and say, no, they actually did nothing wrong, when there's a mountain of evidence showing they did something wrong. And then they'd actually recommend to switch over to a civil court, and then the same people who were let off from not having to pay in the criminal court, they'll actually turn around and sue the people who sued them in civil court, and they'll get these $1 million payouts. So the people who actually ran around burning down buildings and killing cops and stuff like that, they'll actually turn around and get paid millions of dollars by the city that they destroyed. Why? Because why not? They can do it. They're in control of this stuff. They're in control of the law and order. This is the thing that you need to understand. Until you understand this law and order lie and understand the difference between legal and lawful, you're constantly going to be misunderstanding what's going on. You're going to be misled. And the reason why is they want to mislead you. They want to make you misunderstand what's actually going on. Why? Because it gives them more power. It gives them more opportunity to actually lie, steal, cheat, deceive, and gain power. That's the point of the operation. This is powerful people exercising that power. Why do they have power? Because they've been able to deceive the population into accepting those people who are the liars, the cheaters, the stealers as being legitimate. The general public has this false belief in the legitimacy of the government, and it's ridiculous. Most people, when you start actually asking them questions, doing the Socratic method of like, so do you believe the government has legitimacy? They're like, oh yes, they're so legitimate, it's amazing. And you're like, why do they have legitimacy? Oh, because they're there and they're legitimate. It's like, yeah, but why? Well, because they're there and they're awesome and they'll protect us and they provide for people. And it goes on in this like illogical train of thought where the people who believe in government believe that the government actually has a benefit to society, but they don't understand that the government's actually just stealing from Peter to pay Paul. The government provides nothing of value. It doesn't create value. It doesn't actually create jobs. All it does is borrow money from private entities known as banks at interest so that they can give those lending amounts to their friends who are all part of Team Evil. And this is the thing that most people just do not understand. They don't get it. Government provides nothing of value. The government creates nothing of value. The government is there to steal from you. The government successfully steals from you and then takes the stolen goods and wastes it. And then since it wasted the money, it needs more money, so it borrows from their friends. And because it borrows from their friends demand interest on the borrowing, and then the debt explodes. The debt just gets larger and larger and larger. Why? Because the government actually doesn't spend taxes on repaying the loans that it borrowed money from, right? So it's not actually repaying the borrowed money. It just actually borrows more and more money, and it wastes the money that it actually takes in through the fraud of taxation. See, they want you to believe that the government has a legitimate right to tax people, but that's not true. It's just a fraud. It's just legal theft. They basically take theft, and when they do it, it's legal and no problem. If you did it, it would be considered illegal, and it would be considered a crime. This is the point that I'm trying to get across, is that they can redefine any behavior, they can describe it, and whenever they do it, it's not a crime. When you do it, it's a crime. Why? Because they are the ones who are defining these terms. They're the ones that are legally doing this stuff. They're the ones who are committing the fraud. They pretend to be legitimately in control when they're not. And what's amazing is that you ask people, like, why does the government have a legitimate rule over you? What is the legitimacy that you think they have? And they can't actually pin it down. And if you talk to people who are a little bit more wise about history and have a little more philosophical point of view, they'll talk about this thing called, see, there used to be that the kings used to call this thing called, what was it, the divine right of kings. So the kings claimed that the Church of Rome, the Roman Catholic Church, granted the divine right of kings from God to these rulers, right, to the king. And it was upheld as legal schmeagle by the church. That was the legitimacy claim. And if you went against the Catholic Church, they would withdraw your legitimacy to rule. So if you were a king and you did what the Catholic Church wanted, you were given this thing called the divine right of kings. But if you misbehaved or went against the church, they would withdraw your divine right of kings. Just like that, like a snap of the fingers. They give it and they take it away. After a while, people got kind of tired of that. And then they came up with this philosophical thing back in the 1700s. That was called the, what was that called? The social contract. So the social contract was this theoretical model by which if you're participating in a society, then you've signed the social contract. Now, what's amazing is they never actually got anyone to sign the social contract because that would be too logical, right? If someone actually wanted to give their autonomy and their sovereignty, their liberty over to a ruling party, you'd think that they would actually sign a document having an exchange saying, okay, well, I'm going to give you all my liberty, but you're going to give me something back. See, the people who wanted to have false sense of authority don't want to give anything back. They want to take it all. So they said that in theory, that people have signed the social contract. And what was the social contract? Well, the government was going to provide safety and security and benefits. But what was amazing is that they said they never actually explained the exchange, where basically the government's going to give safety, security, and benefits, and people were going to give up their liberty for security. And then they're also going to give up taxes to pay for the whole government structure. So people somehow agreed through this social contract to agree to pay any taxes the politicians just came up with out of thin air. No matter how much taxation the government wanted to do through the social contract theory, people already agreed to it. Why? Because the government said so. Because there's a social contract theory in place, don't you know? And what's amazing is people for years have tried to challenge the legitimacy of the social contract theory, and they've never been able to have the courts admit there's no such thing. The courts only dance around it. They will bend themselves into pretzels trying to not acknowledge the fact that there is no social contract, but still assert that there is a social contract that demands performance. by you physically being in a landmass that they claim is either a town, such as a municipality, or even a country, or anywhere in the world, is claimed by somebody as being their jurisdiction. And the courts pretend that by you physically being there, by your feet being on that ground that was claimed by somebody at some point, that you have just agreed to the social contract. And what's amazing is people for years have tried to withdraw their consent from the social contract, but the government will never allow it, the courts will never recognize it, and they all pretend that you're an idiot for trying to withdraw your consent from the social contract. The reason why is that if you could actually withdraw your social contract consent, right, can withdraw your consent to be governed officially and say, I'm on my own, I'm independent, then they would no longer be able to lay claim on you. They would no longer be able to police you. They'd no longer be able to tax you with threat of force. Many of their schemes would just evaporate in an instant, and that's why they can never allow you to be recognized as withdrawing your consent to be governed. This is their scam. This is their scheme. It's their big con. It's just fascinating when you start looking at the history of people who have tried to withdraw their consent to be governed. And it always comes back to these backflips where the government claims through the social contract, you have to obey what they're telling you to do. And then when you challenge the legitimacy, they basically call you insane, because you'd have to be insane not to recognize the benefits of their amazing rule over you and all the benefits that your taxes go to pay. And it doesn't matter how much evidence you pile up on top of the desk in front of you. It doesn't matter how much you show them that what they're doing is destructive. You want nothing to do with it. You don't want them stealing from you. You don't want them taking your wealth and giving it over to their friends. You don't think redistribution of wealth is a good idea. You think a meritorious society is the way to go. It doesn't matter how logical, how wonderful your arguments are. They get shot down. Why? Because it's in their interest to shoot it down, because that's their false claim to legitimacy. And it's just fascinating. Even back in the day when the colonies of America in 1775, when they were getting ready to have their revolution to throw off the shackles of the King of England, there was a book written called Common Sense by Thomas Paine. And if you actually read the book Common Sense today, it's a little bit older English, but very brilliantly written, and it applies today just as it did then. And we're back in the same situation that we were then. People trying to use common sense to get away from the tyranny are shot down all the time. Why? Because the tyrants don't want you to be able to reason your way out of their slavery. They want you just to shut up, pay your taxes, and do what you're told, and die when you're told to. That's all they want. It's pretty simple. And they don't want any upset. If you actually read Thomas Paine's Common Sense, it'll shock you how on point it is, even 250 years later. It's just wild. This is the thing, is that common sense is common sense, and it's ageless. This is why the Stoics and their concepts are so timeless, because they apply to human nature then and now. And when you actually start thinking of Stoic philosophy and actually applying it to your life, and realizing it that you are in control of you and that's it. And if you actually control your reactions to the world around you, you can actually have a better experience. You can actually get out from a lot of stupid things going on by actually just controlling your reaction to them. Instead of getting mad, you can just walk away. You can let things go. You can just drop it. And that is a power that you have while you have it. And until you recognize this potential power and recognize that you need to use it while you can before you lose it, that's where your power lies. So this is the thing. When you start recognizing the difference between legal versus lawful, everything becomes more simple, more clear, and based on principle. And that's the thing they don't want you to understand. They don't want you to see the simplicity of this beautiful the differences between lawful and legal. They want you to think they're the same thing because they want you to be deceived. They want to rob from you. They want to steal from you. They want to harm you. They want to threaten you. They want to control you. And their control relies on their deception. As soon as you realize what's going on and act accordingly, that's when they lose power. When people do it en masse, they can peacefully transition from the old way to a new way. And they really don't want that to happen. Why? Because their control structure requires people to be ignorant and stupid and compliant and fearful. As soon as people stop being fearful and start being, asserting their God-given liberty, then things change in incremental ways, slowly, and then all at once. And that's what they're deathly afraid of. See, when you get into the legal side of things, it doesn't matter what's lawful or not, because in the lawful side of things, everything is simple. If you did not harm someone or harm someone's property or not honor your word, then there's nothing to talk about. You are free. Your liberty is not impeded by anyone because there's no one with a valid claim against you. See how that works? There's no karma to deal with. There's no karma to balance. If you harm someone or someone's property or dishonored your word, there'd be a point where you'd have to compensate them to balance the karma from your bad behavior. If you broke their thing, you'd have to pay for a replacement or give them a replacement. If you hurt them somehow, you'd have to help them become whole. Either help them recover from the injury or give them something to compensate them for the injury they're suffering. And then if you dishonored your word, you'd have to make up for it by honoring your word and doing something as a penance to make up for it and say that you're not going to do it again and mean it, right? That's why the people who are controlling things that are so dishonest, they don't want law. They don't want natural law. They want legal. So I'll give you an example. So in history, in the place called Canada, there was a period of time where there's all kinds of legal schmeagle things going on, and it's kind of different in Canada because it's basically a holding. It's a plantation where everything's owned like chattel property. Every one is owned by the thing called the crown, and it gets more convoluted. But the important point is this. There's a period of time in 1755 where a bunch of French people... So what's important to understand about the history of Canada is that Canada was this area that's known as Canada, was this area that was basically claimed by both the France and England and Spain. And they're all vying for areas of this, and Spain basically gave up the north pretty quick, and they kept stuff in the south for a long time. But basically for a long time it was the Kingdom of France and the Kingdom of England that were laying claim to the North America. There's a lot of fighting going on, and then it's kind of interesting because the French gave up, France gave up a big chunk of what's called Canada today, which is formerly known as Quebec, because of some political things going on. And then the French sold areas of the United States to the Americans when the Napoleonic Wars were going on. So it gets very convoluted. But what ended up happening was you had this giant chunk of people who were all French in the middle of an English colony. And what's interesting is in all the other places in the world, generally England would make people learn English and adopt the culture. But they specifically kept the French culture alive in this area known as Quebec because they had a long-term plan of division. They could always use the divide and conquer strategy to keep things under control, and they've done it. Repeatedly in history since then, they've used the division between French culture and English culture in Canada as a wedge issue to get all kinds of concessions that go in the way that the Crown wanted. What's interesting is there's a group of people called, what were they called? They were basically a mixture of French and Indians, American Indians. They were basically like Métis, but they were French, not English Métis. And this made them a different group. And I'm trying to remember the name of it, but they had a big thing in 1755 where there was an expulsion of the Acadians. That's what it was called. They called themselves Acadians. And the Acadians did not recognize the rule of the British, and they did not recognize the rule of the French. They believed they were separate people who had they were descendants from the French, but they did not recognize either government. So the Acadians were this rebel group that was actually stomped out originally by the French, and then the English continued on stomping them. And there's this thing called the expulsion of the Acadians that happened in 1755. So if you ever meet an Acadian or you see a flag with the date 1755, that's the expulsion of the Acadians. What ended up happening was the Acadians were kicked out under pain of death, and they basically fled. A lot of them went down to Baton Rouge in Louisiana, and that's where you get a lot of this weird Cajun culture. You're thinking like, what's that, right? The Cajun culture was like a blend of a lot of different things, but a lot of the Acadians went down to the States, to Baton Rouge and places like that, and then a bunch of them just went right into the woods as far as possible and kind of disappeared. And so there's a big Acadian culture revival going on in places like New Brunswick and Nova Scotia that are not considering themselves Quebec French. They consider themselves a different entity because they're descendants from the French, but they mixed with the Indians, the American Indians, and became this new thing. They're called Acadians. Anyways, so they had their big thing going on. The point that I'm making here is that legally it was just decided one day that the government didn't want them anymore, and they were basically running for their lives. Now, what's important to understand is that the legal definition of anything can change whenever the people who are in control of the state decide to change the definition. This is where it gets confusing, right? They can actually change the definition of a man to be anything they want it. They can change the definition of a woman to be anything they want it to be. And it doesn't matter how illogical it is. It doesn't matter how unjust it is. It doesn't matter how stupid it is. They are claiming power. And if you don't bow to their power, they will stomp you into the ground. See, its might is right. It's in this situation. It doesn't matter how stupid it is, how illogical, not anti-nature, it's anti-intellectual. It just doesn't matter. And this is the point. They can get away with murder and then just call it abortion, right? They just legally define murdering children as abortion and it's all good. Why? Because they call it abortion and it's all good. Legally, they've defined the term to be something that they're not going to experience repercussions over. If you just decide to murder a baby, that'd be murder, and you'd go to jail for that if they found you guilty. But when they do it en masse at an abortion clinic, they murder babies all the time, and they don't go to jail. Why? Because they've redefined the terms so that it's legally all right for them to do it. And this is the thing that's so confounding. They just have to legally define whatever they want to be however they want, and then the extension, which is of them, is the courts, and the courts find that everything they're doing is just fine, and they're never held accountable for the atrocious actions that they're doing. So as an example, with all these lockdowns that happened during the COVID insanity, these lockdowns happened in contravention of everything sensible, everything scientific, and everything that would have made sense. It went in contravention of that. And the reason why is because the people who were pushing the COVID lockdowns were not trying to benefit anyone. They were actually trying to murder the population in a specific way that they could get away with. See, if they went around strangling people in the street, if they just legally defined that as okay, they could get away with it. But it wouldn't be as smooth for them. They wouldn't be able to get as many people killed because the general population would wake up. See, deception is the point. Deception is the point of this operation. They can actually kill millions of people that will sign up to take a suicide shot. And why they take it? Because they're told it's safe and effective and there's no downside. And if you don't do it, you're going to kill grandma. So there's all these arguments that are illogical, irrational, not based on fact, but they said it. And then they enforced it in society. And they said that if you don't get the jab, you're going to be fired. Because they had all these health codes that came out that said, okay, well, if you don't take the jab, you're not going to be allowed to be around the public because it's unsafe. And then they fired all these people. So the whole group of people that refused to take the jab because they knew it didn't make sense were then taking the jab because they thought they had to provide for their family. They didn't realize that by taking the jab, they're murdering themselves and now they're going to be incapacitated for life. And they're not helping their family. If you're dead, you're not paying for your family's well-being. But they didn't know that because they were tricked and told, oh, it's all upside. It's safe and effective and there's no downside. They were lied to. But the people who lied to them are legally shielding themselves through law, through this legal process, where whenever they do things that cause people to die, they're legally protected. It's really simple and straightforward. If you did something to cause someone to die, they would want you to go to jail for manslaughter or murder if you actually intended to kill people. See, they don't go to jail for manslaughter or murder when they're actually intending to kill people because it's their scam, it's their scheme. They're controlling the legal definitions of words, the application of the legal schmiegel through their courts. It just goes on and on. They're all in the same team and they're protecting each other while they're pushing forward with this eugenics program rebranded as transhumanism. And they're basically wanting to wipe out lots of the population. They're doing it legally. because they control the legal process. And this is the thing that you need to understand. Until you wake up from the legal scam, you're going to fall for the other scams. See, the reason why they're always shouting law and order is because they're the ones who are creating the laws that are legal, and they're the ones that's enforcing the order with their goons. And their goons only do selective enforcement. Their friends don't have problems with the law when it's legal, right? So they protect their friends through selective prosecutions. And then they persecute their enemies through selective prosecutions. They can prosecute a ham sandwich if they want to, because there's no need for common sense. There's no need for anything that's actually based on evidence or based on any kind of common sense. This is the problem we're dealing with when we're dealing with law. In the legal sense, legal can be defined anything they want it to be. Any word can be redefined. Legally, they can just redefine a man to be a woman, or anything to be a man, or anything to be a woman. But that's not how it works according to the laws of nature. The laws of nature are simple. A boy is born with a penis, he will grow into a man. A girl is born with a vagina, she will grow into a woman. It's as simple as that. You can do a blood test, a double-blind blood test, and see a double Y chromosome means it's a woman. You cannot change the chromosomes. You cannot change the genetics of the individual. That was predetermined at birth, at conception. When the soul was seated in the body, when the sperm penetrates the egg and there's the spark of life, that is the miracle of life, the soul is seated, it spreads out its energetic body. Its energetic body goes about commanding the cells to create the body that it needs through the stages of life. This is the miracle of life. And it's really important to understand this, because when you contravene the laws of nature, there's repercussions, there's consequences. No matter how much they try to avoid it, there is always consequences. If you try to become a cannibal and eat other people, there is consequences. You cannot get around the fact that you will die from eating other people. Why? Because it's unnatural. It's against the laws of nature to eat your own kind. This is a perversion, and there's consequences for perversion. Perversion, what's going to happen? Well, people who try this whole cannibalism thing end up getting these different conditions whereby they start shaking, their body starts eating itself, their brain starts cannibalizing itself, and they basically die in just a horrific, painful, nasty experience. Why? Because that's the repercussions for cannibalism. You cannot get away with that. It's a contravention to the laws of nature, and whenever you contravene the laws of nature, there is consequences. Some people call it karma, other people call it other things. Whatever name you call it is a fact that it's there, no matter how you try to call it a different name. This is the thing that's so important to understand. When you work within the laws of nature, you're more likely to have a successful outcome, and you're less likely to have a negative outcome through karma. It doesn't mean you're going to have an easy go of life, because there's lots of evil people doing evil things, and they're conspiring at this time to kill you in the most expensive, brutal way possible. Why? Because they've set up the legal system to protect themselves. They can write books about how they're going to kill you. And then if you try to actually go to their courts to try to pursue remedy, you'll never get it. Why? It's because it's their courts. There was a fellow who was actually tracking down human slavery in Europe and pedophilia, and he was amazed that there was this book that was published in Europe. In this book, they tried to get it removed from the shelves of the stores because it actually explained how to be a good pedophile, how to be a productive pedophile, how to actually stretch the anuses of children so that it could be inserted with things. And what's amazing is the book was explicit about taking children under 1 year old and stretching out their anuses for sexual pleasure of adults. Now, this is pretty amazing. This is horrific. that should not be available. But what's amazing is the system says, no, that's a First Amendment right. The right to free speech allows pedophiles to explain to other pedophiles how to properly rape a child without killing the child, right? Now, that is being protected under the banner of free speech. But if you actually say that the government engaged in policy decisions through the fake COVID pandemic that caused the death of people, you will go to jail because they are in control of the legal system and they protect themselves. They're trying to kill the population in an expensive, specific, controlled way. It's a controlled demolition. So pedophiles are protected, but someone saying the truth is not protected. And this is what's so astounding. Until you understand the difference between legal and lawful, you'll keep not understanding what's going on. You'll keep getting it wrong because you keep thinking, oh no, they're just, someone there just doesn't get it, or they just didn't hear it yet, or they don't know the facts yet. No, they know the facts. They know what's going on, and they're part of the scam. They're part of the scheme. They're part of Team Evil that's going to kill you. Going to their courts and expecting them to stop their buddies from doing the thing they've all agreed to do is not going to work. That's why it's essentially important to understand the difference between legal and lawful. See, the way it was sold to people not long ago, when men were more manly and more likely just to run down to the local politician and make him disappear if he was being an idiot, or beat him black and blue for being a moron who was trying to harm other people. It was really simple back then. And I'm not advocating violence. I'm saying that back then people were more apt to just react and act accordingly. So back then they had to tiptoe through the tulips to bring their tyranny in because there was immediate repercussions for evil. People in the town square would do things immediately. They wouldn't wait. They wouldn't talk about it. They just go do it and it would get done. And because of that, not long ago, Team Evil had to actually tiptoe through the tulips and just like slowly bring the stuff around incrementally over many generations so people wouldn't notice. Otherwise, they would not be around to continue on the program. Like I said, I'm not advocating violence, but that's what actually happened. Because when you know someone's planning to kill you, do you just let them kill you? Because that's what they want you to do. They want you just to let them kill you and don't complain about it. That's how twisted this is. Anyways, not long ago, there was a concept where in law, right, if you went to the courts, it was basically a concept of, was there anybody harmed, right? That was the whole premise of a lawsuit. That's the foundation of a lawsuit. Was somebody harmed? And if there was nobody who was harmed directly, or their property harmed, or they experienced a loss by way of fraud, all right, if they did not experience harm according to natural law or a contravention of natural law, then there was no lawsuit. You would never be able to move forward through the courts not long ago because they actually kept the premise of natural law. If there was no harm, there's no case. There's nothing to be compensated for. If no one was harmed, how can you make them whole when they've never been broken? Or they've never been harmed, never been damaged? There's no problem here. What's the problem? This is where they used to have a thing with frivolous lawsuits. You couldn't bring a frivolous lawsuit. You couldn't say, that guy hurt my feelings, so I want him to pay me $1 million. It didn't work that way. They had to show actual damage. Were you physically damaged? Was your property damaged? Or did he deceive you and steal from you by way of fraud? If not, then get out of here. That's how the courts were created and popularized, because people back then had more common sense than they do today. Because today we're living through a generation of morons because of compulsory government education that makes them moronic. And people have no backbones because of the total onslaught in the food. All the air is poison, the water's poison, the food's poison, and people have been dumbed down to the point where they don't even know what's going on anymore. Now, this is what's important, is that not long ago, to bring a lawsuit, you had to have a contravention of natural law. And it kept things pretty simple. Unless you can prove actual harm, there's nothing to talk about. But since then, they've done so many different scams where they basically brought forward the concept of legislation and regulations. And this is where it gets really convoluted, because with regulation and legislation, they're legislating or regulating something that has no basis in natural law. As an example, you can't actually bring in regulations to stop somebody from doing something if what they're doing causes no harm, right? There's no basis in law according to natural law. You can't say, okay, you can't travel in your vehicle without a driver's license. How could they say that? There's no actual basis for natural law. There's no harm. You could travel in your vehicle for years and never have any harm to anyone. You just gas up your vehicle, travel around, do your errands, go back, years go by and there's no harm. So why would there be any need to have a driver's license? This is where the regulation thing comes in. And the original premise was multifaceted. Originally, when they brought in driver's licenses, they said, okay, they tried off with speed limits, but then they were unenforceable because they didn't know who to write the ticket to. So they needed a driver's license to be able to stick a fine to someone that they could identify. So that was the premise for trying to get everyone with a driver's license. But they couldn't just demand everyone get a driver's license, because back then people were too wise to what was going on and they would refuse to participate in tyranny. So what happened was the people got together who were the conspirators. Team Evil got together and said, okay, how can we figure out a way that makes sense for us to start regulating this in some way? So they said, okay, well, commercial trucks, right, big trucks that go down the road are beating up the road and they require more road work. So if you're driving a commercial truck with a big heavy truck going down the road, beating up the road, well, we're going to have to repair that. So that's going to cost. And if you're causing the need to repair that, then you need to pay. So this is where they came down with the natural law argument that if you have a vehicle that's heavy and wrecks the roads, and someone has to pay to fix the roads that you wrecked, well then you should have to pay for that. And this is where they started regulating commercial trucking. They said, okay, these guys, it didn't even matter if they actually were breaking the road or destroying the road or wearing the road. The premise was simple. These commercial trucks are big and heavy, and we're going to assume they're damaging the road, and we're going to assume that the local government's going to have to raise taxes or borrow money to repair the roads, and there's a cost. So since there's a cost, there's an injured party. It's not that the road is injured, it's that the general public has to pay for the road to be repaired. So there's a general injury. So you see how it's like a step 1, step 2, step 3, you got to squint to kind of see it coming, and then they lay it on you, right? That, okay, there's kind of an injured party possibly, especially when the government has to spend money to fix the roads. And they never talk about being a direct causation. They're saying theoretically, it seems plausible that there could be a direct causation. And this is where you get into regulations that become so ridiculous, where they regulate everything. So they started off saying, okay, well, the roads are being destroyed by heavy trucks, so heavy trucks have to be regulated, so they need a license to drive these commercial trucks. And that license is going to have a fee, the fees are going to be collected, and the fees are going to offset the cost of repairing the roads. So there's a direct cause and effect relationship where the fees collected for having a license to drive heavy trucks would pay for the repair of the roads that the heavy trucks are supposedly destroying. See how it used to be very straightforward. These trucks are destroying the roads. We're going to collect a fee from them to repair the roads so that the taxpayer or the general public doesn't have to pay for it because they're not destroying the roads. And then it went from there. They just started expanding. Then it became, oh, these heavy trucks, they need insurance. So there has to be regulation to make sure there's insurance in case they run someone over and kill them. We're going to make sure there's fair compensation. So then they brought in insurance, mandatory insurance for driving big commercial trucks. And then they brought in, all these licensing fees and then inspections to make sure your truck is not falling apart. And the thing is no one in their right mind would drive a vehicle that's going to kill them driving down the road. Like, that just doesn't happen. Like, if that happened, those people would die pretty quick and they would not be on the road. If someone's too stupid to keep their vehicle in condition so that it doesn't crash on the road, they're going to die pretty quick and they're not going to be a hazard on the road very long. But the same people that come up with reasons for regulations say, no, there's people out there who are stupid, and we have to pretend that everyone is stupid so that we can regulate accordingly. So they assume you're stupid. That's their whole premise for regulations regarding motor vehicles. They believe their position legally is that you are a moron, and if they don't control you, you're going to kill other people and yourself. That's their premise, and it's not true. Yes, there's morons. Yes, people die in accidents, but no amount of regulation stops people from being morons or stops people from getting into accidents. It happens. So this is where they get this regulatory engine going, and then they can regulate everything. At this point, there's nothing not regulated. It's a double negative, I know. So everything is regulated. I'll say it a different way. Everything is regulated because they have an opportunity to regulate it, and people put up with it. So what happens is, this general principle, to keep it simple, with cars, right, and the motor vehicles. They started off with this commercial thing of, we need commercial drivers to have licenses. We need them to have registration so that those registration fees can pay for the repair of the roads, and on it went. And then eventually they said, okay, well, we're just going to decide everyone's commercial. That's why you have to get a driver's license. So they're assuming you're driving for a commercial reason when you ask for a driver's license. And then through the fraud of legal, they actually get you to ask for a registration. It gets so stupid. See, when you go to the motor vehicle office and ask to register to have a driver's license, anyone who goes there is basically, they see it as you're begging to be regulated because you're too stupid to take care of yourself. And anyone who requests an application in law means you're begging. That's the legal definition. So they say if you're filling out an application for registration, it means that not only are you begging to give your property away, but you're actually too stupid to know what to do otherwise, and you're demanding that they regulate you. This is where the fraud comes in. It's basically fraud, but they legally get away with it because they wrote the laws that are fraudulent, and their courts, which are theirs and their friends, keep you in check. All of this is just a big scam where the people who can write the laws can get away with anything they want. Their friends don't go to jail for anything. Their enemies go to jail for nothing. And this is how it works. And then you can expand out from this regulatory concept to infinity. And at any day, most people break about 100 laws and have no idea. The reason why they have no idea is no one's ever read all the laws because it's almost impossible. There's so many laws to read that it's almost impossible to read them all. It's like that ridiculous. Every day you break about 100 laws, but whether anyone's going to enforce them or not is the big question. Why would they bother enforcing it? They only enforce it if they're coming after you for something. And when they're coming after you, they can find 100 ways to harass you through regulation that exists that has not been enforced before, but they can enforce it on you just to steal your money, take you off the road, make life hard for you, and that's the point of it. Selective prosecutions. That's what they do. As soon as the police are given your name to go after you in a particular municipality, they will just be hunting you down. They'll look for every opportunity to give you a ticket, to give you a fine, to take your vehicle off the road, to tow your vehicle, to impound your vehicle. Everything they can to cause some sort of damage to you is totally legal for them to do, and they do it. This is the problem with the legal, is legal allows them to harm you, and you can never stop it while you're dealing within their system because they've made it so that they can touch you, but you can't touch them back. See? It's the law. It's the legal schmeagle. They can touch you, but you can't touch them back. And they're legally immune from prosecution. So no matter if they come and cut your arm off, you can't prosecute them. Why? Because they're legally immune. They're on Team Evil, and you're not. Like, it's that stupid. There's been some really amazing examples of this. Like, as an example, when fake President Barack Obama was president, there was 6 years of his 8-year presidency where they had this movement called the Tea Party movement that basically eviscerated the Congress so that the Congress couldn't get the votes to pass his socialist policies. So instead of actually going through Congress, he actually just did a regulatory thing where he would just sign executive orders. Every other day he was signing an executive order, and he signed something like 20,000 executive orders while he was president. It was outrageous. And then what's amazing is that he actually regulated everything to favor his friends. He would regulate the coal industry for a year to destroy it, and then all the small businesses would go bankrupt, and then his friends and his political donors like George Soros and his group will come in and buy the bankrupt coal mines, and then Obama would just reverse the regulation, and then it became profitable again. So he would actually make regulations that would destroy an industry. They call it smash and grab. It's so common, they actually have a name for it. It's called smash and grab regulations. They will come in for a period of time, say 2 years, and they will destroy a whole industry through regulations that makes it impossible to do business. And everyone who's in a business like that, who's not connected, gets destroyed. They go bankrupt. Everything's taken from them. And then what happens is because they have legal obligations, legal schmeagle, right? If they're a publicly traded company, they have these legal obligations to pay back their the debtors and all that stuff. It gets really complicated. What ends up happening is the whole company gets eviscerated and sold off for pennies on the dollar to all the friends of the people who are the regulators. And then as soon as the great handoff happens of wealth from one group to the other, then they reverse the regulations, and the people who are now holding all that industry property become fabulously wealthy because there's no longer any regulation. It's holding them back from making massive profits. It's called smash and grab. Obama did it in many different industries. The coal industry was one. Another one was private education. He actually destroyed I think it was 15 private universities. And then his friends came in and bought up the private universities when they were bankrupt. He reversed the regulation, and they turned around and started making massive profits. This is what's going on. If you allow this stuff to go on and not realize what's happening, you will be destroyed. They will just make a law saying that all people with red hair can be picked up and executed within 24 hours. Why? Because law and order. Whoever makes the law makes the orders. And they can just decide everyone who has blonde hair can be rounded up and killed within 24 hours. Why? Because they wrote it down on a piece of paper and they voted on it. And you think that's like reality? Yes, it is. That's what's actually going on. They can actually decide that tomorrow and make it happen. This is how stupid it is. If you think they have legitimacy, they will push it right to the end where they will actually let you die with that idea in mind. It's wild. And until you understand this general concept, it's easy to be fooled, because that's the point, is to fool you. Most people have never been told this. They've never heard this. They've never heard this concept. They have no idea. They've never read the books. They've never read the court documents. They've never followed the news, seeing what happens in real time, seeing the after effects and the repercussions from this kind of behavior. It's really important to understand these general concepts, because when you understand the general concepts, you can see what's coming. There's a saying that says, history does not repeat itself, but it rhymes. And that is true. There's a rhyme going on, because what worked before will work again. The scoundrels today just repeat the things that their grandfather scoundrels did to achieve their ends. And it's not fair. It's not right. It's contrary to the natural law. But because they do it, and they don't care that it contravenes natural law, and they are liars and they're deceivers, they get away with it. It's massively profitable for them. They live in the lap of luxury because they live like gods on earth as a parasite class. But they'll never call it that they're a parasite class. They say it's their divine right to rule, that somehow they were given it by who? Whoever gave it to them. And it's theirs to seize, and they seized it, and you're doing nothing about it, so too bad, buddy. This is what the sad truth is, and it's important to understand this concept. If you fall for the legal trap, you will die. This is where they're bringing it. There's no end to what they can do legally. They can just add layers and layers of complexity and bring you right into the grave. Until you wake up to it, you're going to fall for it. That's why I'm making these podcasts, to wake you up. See, people who are dishonest want to do everything legally. Why? Because they can legally do anything they want, and they protect themselves legally with their friends who are in the courts, the enforcement arm, right? And then they selectively prosecute their enemies, and they make sure that their friends are never prosecuted because, again, of selective prosecutions. This is the whole point. The point of being in control of the legal system is to be in control of everything. That's why they do it. It's dishonest. It's unethical. It's wrong. But they do it because they can get away with it. And most people have no idea. They've ensured people have no idea because they've taken over the education system legally and had mandatory, legally, government schooling, which dumbs people down. This is the point. They want to dumb down populations just smart enough to follow orders, but not smart enough to realize it's a bad deal and want to be free. That's how it works. So what's fascinating is when you think about South Africa, people have this idea in their mind, this oversimplification of what was apartheid. They're like, oh, apartheid, that was evil. It's terrible. All these racist people doing racist things, just awful. And then you're asking them like, well, what was racist about it? Oh, there was segregation in society. Oh yeah, segregated everything. Then the question is, are you allowed to be segregated? You know, what's wrong with segregation? It comes down to, if you choose to be in a community and you want only a specific type of people in that community, why can't you just have your people in that community? Say if you want a Christian community of family-oriented people, so your children are going to be safe because everyone in the community is like you and will protect the children. Wouldn't you want that type of society, that type of community? See, we all have the God-given right to associate or disassociate with whoever we wish. That is a lawful right we have. We don't have to be around anyone because it'd be a violation of our liberty. It'd be a violation of our free will. So we have the lawful right to associate or disassociate with anyone we want. See, this is where it gets convoluted and confusing, and they've done this on purpose. They've tried to demonize the idea of segregation being a negative thing in one way and then glorifying it in another. So to keep it simple, and I'm going to keep with South Africa in a second, but on university campuses right now, the woke left are saying that white people are the problem, and if you have pale skin, you're not allowed to come into certain areas because of whiteness. Now, they're being dishonest because the concept of whiteness is actually communism. See, capitalism. The communists call capitalism whiteness, and they're trying to demonize whiteness, and they know that if they try to demonize capitalism, people know it's nonsense. They realize it's intellectually devoid of actual merit. So they can't actually say, they can't actually demonize capitalism because capitalism has brought 90% of the world out of poverty in the last 100 years. So they can't actually demonize capitalism because everyone knows that's stupid. So what they've done is they dishonestly changed the word capitalism to mean whiteness, and they're trying to make out as if, oh, there's a white supremacy problem going on, when really there's a capitalist problem in their mind going on. There's too much capitalism, too much control of the free market where people get to choose. They want a top-down government that's authoritarian, that decides for everyone, that does the thinking for everyone. But they're not able to intellectually argue this thing because it's stupid. It's so stupid, it's ridiculous. And when you actually talk to these communists, their thinking is like a pretzel. It's like a pretzel logic. It's like a Gordian knot that's so twisted up, you try to like probe it with logic and reason, and it just doesn't work. They have these slogans that they're programmed with. They have these ideologies that they have a knee-jerk reaction and respond with. Everything's scripted. Nothing is thoughtful or thought out. Nothing is deep. It's all shallow. It's just so stupid. It's outrageous. Anyways, so right now on college campuses, they're creating these white-free spaces because whitey's the problem. And what they're not telling you is it's actually capitalism is the problem, but they're making it really confusing by saying people with pale skin need to leave because they're the problem because of racism, and it goes on. And the whole thing is so dishonest. That's the thing. We're dealing with dishonest people who will not tell the truth, because if they told the truth, you'd realize they're morons. So they have to lie, cheat, and steal to try to gain power. So we're dealing with this particular ideological possession, and we're trying to, get through it, and it's so difficult to actually get to the truth of what they're saying because they're being dishonest about everything they talk about. Now, getting back to apartheid. Now, what's amazing about apartheid is when you look historically, what happened? A group of Dutch people called the Boer went down to South Africa like hundreds of years ago. Some of them have been there for 200 years. And what they did is they created a community. The community was for the Boer. It was Boer people making a community for them. And what they did is they terraformed the land into very productive gardens. They took basically wild, savage lands and turned it into very productive gardens and farming communities, and they created an abundance. They created industry where there was none. They took a wild chunk of land and created a amazingly flourishing society. Of course, that society has problems like every society does because the parasite class comes in and screws everything up. But the people who were there trying to make a go of it, the reason why they were there is because they're trying to get away from the tyranny of their own countries. The Dutch were trying to get away from the Dutch parasites, the Dutch government, because they were awful. So the people who wanted to be free went to South Africa and created their own community in South Africa. And then they had an apartheid system because they wanted it to be for the Boer. And the Boer happened to have pale skin compared to the local Africans who had dark skin. So it was not a racist thing where they hated black people. It was that they loved their people and they wanted them to flourish and thrive. And they wanted to keep their group pure. They didn't want a bunch of inbreeding with the locals because it caused all kinds of problems. They could see that it happened over time. Whenever there was some sort of intermixing breeding going on, it caused just conflict and chaos in their society, and they knew they did not want that because they had done that all before. They've done it. They've done it repeatedly. Every time they did it, it screwed everything up and made chaos and conflict and strife. It was not worth it. That's why they had the apartheid system. Now, go forward in time, what ended up happening was they created such a thriving system whereby they had the 5th largest economy for a period of time in the world. They were exporting so much food, it would make your head spin. And that was their main export, was food. Then they got into other production, but mainly they were a farming community. These are farmers. The people that teach this stuff in school just teach you a fraudulent version of history that is just really ridiculous. They basically painted out to be a bunch of white supremacist, Nazi-saluting bureaucrats that were running around just loving to be racist, and that was the whole point of it. That was not the point of it. The point of it was to keep their society pure so that they could thrive. That was the point. They were not racist. They were logical. They had dealt with this for hundreds of years, and they knew the problems of intermarriages with the locals. The other locals, because they became locals. These people were native to South Africa. If your family's been there for 200 years, you're a native. This is the problem, is that whenever they interbred with the local black population, this caused all kinds of problems. It just caused just heartache and problems. So they realized, okay, one thing people don't understand is that when you have low IQ population, and blacks in Africa tend to have low IQ. Half the population of Africa has below 70 IQ. Now, what happens with the IQ is that you end up having smaller head space, like a smaller skull. So what ends up happening is physiologically there's consequences to having lower IQ. When a mother has low IQ, she has smaller hip displacement because her body expects her to have low IQ children. The problem is if you have a high IQ father with a big head and he has a baby with a small IQ mother with a small head and small hips, is either the baby or the mother is going to die or both in childbirth. And this is traumatic for everyone involved. So any man who actually impregnates a black woman, if you've got high IQ, you've got a big head, there is a problem there. And this is what they've experienced for many, many years. They actually had a lot of women and children die, and the men die of heartache because they actually love these people. So they knew intergenerationally over time that this is not a good deal. It doesn't work. This is reality. The people who teach this stuff in school ignore reality and try to teach this oversimplification of history to make it to seem like a good guy, bad guy scenario. So what ended up happening was, this is why the population was segregated. They want their people to have babies and multiply and be happy and not have these problems of having the mother and the child die. if the mother had dark skin. So it's very simple. Now, they never tell you this. No one ever talks about this because it's forbidden, because if you know about it, you'll understand why. There's a reason for not intermarrying with certain groups, not having babies with certain groups. You can have, this is where most of the time it's a black-skinned father and a white-skinned mother can work, because the white-skinned mother has big hip displacement. She can have the baby even though the baby might have a smaller skull than otherwise. So she already has the predisposition to be able to take a larger IQ baby. She just passed off a low IQ baby. See how that works? Anyway, the point is that I'm getting to it, the legal versus lawful, is that apartheid was totally legal. People actually made it legal to do that. Now, there was reasons why they had it. There were actually good reasons. And then they legally just did what they wanted. People say, oh, it's just awful. Oh, just the worst thing ever, it's apartheid. And the thing is what happened? So they basically, the Boers wanted their own society for them. They wanted to keep themselves separate from everyone else. And it wasn't until the international finanglings came in to destroy the place that there was a problem. And they made up all these stories that were not true about all this racist conduct that was, some of it was true, most of it was not true. Most of the stories you hear about were never real. They're not real. These are activists who are lying to try to achieve their end. And these activists often were brainwashed by Western educations to believe something that did not exist. And they were fighting for a cause that was not real. But yet they went down there with this ideological possession, and they were willing to lie, cheat, and steal to get their ends, because they thought the ends justified the means, which is to free South Africa from the evil whitey. And that's just not what happened. What was really going on is that South Africa had the 5th largest economy in the world, was one of the largest producers of food in the world, and the people who were controlling the world want to destroy the food supply. So number one, they had to destroy South Africa because it was one of the largest food producers in the world. Secondly, they want to demonize people with pale skin, because that's the group that's basically most likely to overthrow the one world government. And then secondly, they want to confuse whiteness with white supremacy with capitalism. They want to confuse those terms so they could get people on board to destroy white supremacy. And the whole thing is just so convoluted. So anyways, what happened was, once the international group got in to destroy South Africa, the place was doomed to be destroyed because they just sabotaged everything possible. What ended up happening was the apartheid government fell because of international things going on. I mean, the CIA was in there destroying stuff. You had the jackals in there doing their destruction of the economy. When you read the book Confessions of an Economic Hitman, so Confessions of an Economic Hitman, you can hear how they financially could go in and destroy a country that didn't do what the global order wanted. And this is what they did in South Africa. They destroyed the place. And then what happened was the government fell because of all the strife, and then the CIA went in there and organized riots. The riots basically tore the place apart. And what ended up happening was they brought in this new woke government. And the woke government was actually running on the principles of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is the first run of a country running on those principles. And what happened? Of course, the place fell apart. The place, you cannot run anything using diversity, equity, and inclusion, because it's a sabotage program to destroy everything it touches. That's the point of it. Anyone who knows what they're looking at knows that's a suicide program. So they implemented in South Africa and destroyed the place even further. But what was really beneficial to the world order guys is these are the guys that run the banks. What happened was the entire government of South Africa was elected, and they were all black-skinned. And they were not hired because they were any good at anything. They were hired because they're black. And because they're black, they thought they should be able to run everything awesome like the last guys did. Now they've got their hands on the controls. But an economy and a country and a whole social group does not run based on that. It used to run based on merit. People who actually knew how to farm would farm food, and they'd make lots of food, and they'd generate lots of wealth because they could sell that food for profit. But then what happened was, as things broke down and the government was not able to keep anything together because they were all morons hired because they happen to have black skin, and as things fell apart, they kept just seizing more and more property from all the whiteys. And they drove everyone with common sense who was not there by principle off the land. So most of the farms shut down. Why? Because the farmers were being brutally murdered and tortured, tortured in the most brutal fashion before they were murdered and then driven off the land. What happened to the land? The land became fallow. It means it went back to wild. Why? Because the black people did not want to farm. They thought that was below them. They thought now that they were in charge of government, they should have every right to just live off the government. And this is where the government started these crazy welfare programs where they're just giving money to everyone because they're black. But it's not an economic model that makes any sense whatsoever. They just ran out of money almost right away, of course. And then what did they do? They borrowed money from the international bankers who are happy to give it to them, because when international bankers lend you money, they get control of what you're doing. They have influence over you, so that's what they did. They basically, the Western powers told these people that the only reason they're not doing well is because Whitey's somehow screwing things up and they just have to get rid of Whitey. When they got rid of Whitey everywhere as they could see, then things are still a problem. They said, oh, there's got to be institutional racism going on. That's the problem. The problem is the entire institutions were run by people that had dark skin. So how does that make any sense? Well, that they're told that, and these people are not smart enough to realize it's stupid. And they never change their course because they're promised, no, if you just run this thing the way we tell you, you'll do awesome and you'll be able to live like kings, like the Whitey did, right? And this is the nonsense. They're basically telling morons how to be morons for free, and then everything the morons didn't work because they didn't understand that what they were doing was moronic, right? These people were put into place not because they're qualified to run anything. They're not qualified to run a convenience store, let alone an entire government that is actually supposed to be doing anything reasonable to help people along. Everything they did was just borrow more money, tax Whitey, imprison Whitey, steal their land, destroy all the white businesses, run them out of town. And then as they did that, all the food dried up, and then they had to buy food from out of country. They went from one of the largest producers in the world to one of the largest importers because they don't make their own food anymore. Because none of the black people either know how to farm or want to farm or know that they want to farm. It's like ridiculous. And it's not because they're black. It's because it's low IQ people that are in positions of power who are doing stupid things that you'd expect from a low IQ person. But they won't hire anyone with higher IQ, because then that would require them to acknowledge the fact that you actually require an IQ to be able to run things in a logical manner. And that doesn't jive well with their concept of Whitey's the problem with everything, and as soon as you get rid of Whitey, they can live like kings. So while the low IQ people don't want to acknowledge that, they don't have what it takes to actually run things like a king. It's the same thing no matter what color of skin you have. It's just that you cannot have morons running things or they'll run it into the ground. And this is the DEI policies. So legally, they ran apartheid that created an abundance. People said it was wrong, but they actually did it legally. And then when apartheid fell, they brought in this legal thing of diversity, equity, inclusion was the basically government policy. And the problem is when they ran it like that, everything fell apart. But it was great for the international bankers who now gained control over South Africa, which they did not have before. And then they lent money to the government, which they had to pay back with interest. And it caused all kinds of control mechanisms to be in place in South Africa that did not exist there before. So the place went from a producer of food to a consumer of food without production. It's so obvious when you actually look at what's happening, but the people who are ideologically possessed can't acknowledge it because they have to acknowledge things that are against their interest, which is to ignore reality. See, they ignore reality because it's convenient for their ideological goals. Anyways, the point is that legally you can run things however you want. Doesn't matter if it's in line with natural law or contravenes natural law, because legally they can just define anything they want. In this case of South Africa is so fascinating because there's parts of it that is actually fascinating in that people were able to actually implement the law legally to parallel natural law, which is what they wanted. And then you had another group that came in and they were demonized, right, by the international groups. But then you had another group who came in and took over legally and did everything in contravention of natural law, and they were celebrated by the international community. Both were doing things legally, but one was doing it against natural law, the other one was doing it with natural law. And as things fall apart, it gets worse and worse and worse. They go more and more in debt. And then they can never acknowledge the problem because they would realize reality, and then their ideological agenda would fall apart. This is where it gets really fascinating. So the difference between lawful and legal is that lawful is in line with natural law, which is number 1, harm no one. Number 2, harm no one's property. 3, honor your word. That's natural law. And then legal can be anything you wanted. And especially the people who want legal want to contravene natural law. They want to make sure that they can lie, cheat, and steal. That's what they want to do. That's the whole reason they want to do things legally, because they can get away with that stuff, because then they legally control the courts and they legally control the enforcement of the laws that they create. You know, the idea of law and order is fine in theory, but which laws and in which order? It gets very convoluted. And the people who worship law and order right now, who are all like, oh, we love police. The only reason they love police right now is because they've not had the boot stomped on their head yet. And that's just a matter of time, because there's a suicide program in the West. The governments that appear to be local are running international agendas that are suiciding the West. That's the point of the operation. They're there to destroy the place. Trudeau in Canada is there to destroy the place on the behalf of the international world order. He's there to suicide Canada. Biden is there in the United States to suicide Canada, right? The Prime Minister of England is there to suicide England. This is what they're there for. They've been put into place to actually destroy the place that they're there, not because they're not really there by merit, and they're not there by actual process, because what happens is the people who want the control just control the elections to make it selections, not elections. You don't actually get to vote for who you want. They just put on whoever they want, and they make it seem like someone voted for them, and it's never you. It's theaters called elections. That's how they run things, and they make it appear like there's a legitimate government when there's not. They appear to be legitimate because it gives them more control for a longer period of time. People don't push back in the same way as a complete tyrant. If there was a complete tyrant government where you knew that everyone hated the guy, then people might push back. There might be more resistance. There might be more resistance groups. People would speak out more freely. But instead, if you think that there's an actual legitimate government, there's this legal process that happened, and people just voted for that guy, and you're supposed to be mad at your neighbor for letting that guy in. I did a whole series of podcasts on the election deception. You should listen to those, because it really explains the psychological operations that elections are today. They're a magical ritual that has psychological effects that make everyone guilty except the guy doing the problems, which is the person who appears to be the elected individual. Like, no one blames Trudeau for what's going on because they blame whoever elected him. But when you actually look at the last election in Canada, of the entire population that could vote, which is only, I forget what the numbers are. It's like, there's a minority of the population of Canada can actually vote in the elections because of all kinds of disqualification reasons. And then of those people who actually were qualified to vote legally, only 1/3 voted for Trudeau. It's like less than 30% voted for Trudeau. It's about 30% voted for Trudeau, and somehow that guy is supposed to be the elected leader. The whole thing is ridiculous. It's when you actually look at the numbers, even their nonsense doesn't make any sense anymore. It's getting so ridiculous. Anyways, the point is that between legal and lawful, the reason why they want to control legal is because they can do anything they want. They can just decide tomorrow that anyone with red hair is going to be put to death in 24 hours. Illegal, they can do it, and their courts will uphold it because it's all legal schmeagle. And this is what you have to understand. You have to disengage legal from lawful, because there's two separate things. They want you to forget that and think it's all the same thing, so they can get away with literal murder. They can just say anyone with blonde hair can be put to death in 24 hours. And it can be so. They can say anyone with black skin can be put to death within 24 hours, and it can be so. They can say anything they want, and it's wrong. It's not correct. It's not moral. It's not lawful, but it's legal. This is the thing. This is the thing I'm trying to disentangle in your mind, legal from lawful, so you can get free of this prison. Once you get free of that and understand with precision what's going on, you're free to actually see things for what they actually are. We're going to close with a prayer. God, please move the hearts of the listeners. Move them in the spirit as only you can, to be better, choose more, and be examples of what you intend your children to be. Remind us in ways that only you can that we are the children of God. We have free will. We are co-creators of this beautiful world that you gifted to us, and we will have abundance if we but choose to, and act to manifest it. God, give them a vision of how they can fulfill their destiny as individuals here and now. We ask that you inspire us to be fearless warriors in spirit and the sword, to be shining examples of what we can do with our divine potential. Fear not, fear not, fear not. We ask that we manifest unwavering courage, the conviction and the heart to live a life worth living, to do our part to manifest a godly realm full of peace and love and abundance here and now. We claim our space as holy. In the name of Jesus Christ, we put on the armor of God. We pick up the sword of the Spirit. We will expand the kingdom. We will manifest goodness in this world. We say these things in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so I've tried to give some concrete examples of the difference between legal and lawful, and hopefully I've made the points to help you differentiate very easily. I could make many more points, and I could go into more history and some more examples, but I think that it's just loading too much into one podcast, and it's a disincentive for other people who may not want to listen to a long podcast. So hopefully this will be a teaser, get it into their mindset, and they'll listen to more stuff or do some more searching for answers and get wise real quick. The sooner we become self-aware and actuated as individuals and be acting like adults who are fully grown, fully competent, fully cognizant of these words, their meanings, and their application, the sooner we become free. The sooner we exercise and enforce our own liberty. Liberty is a birthright given to us by God. We have it. No one can give it to us. We already have it. It's up to us to remember and actuate it. That's the difference. When you actually act out the role of liberty, you will find true liberty, and you will be able to deal with things that come your way. And the more people that do it, the more we can disentangle ourselves from the fraud that is going on all around us. Only through awareness can we observe and see what's actually happening. If you've grown up into a prison, it's hard to tell what's a prison and what's not when all you've known is a prison. Yet it has to be explained to you so you can see it, so then you can realize that you're not actually experiencing liberty because people have convinced you to give up that thing called freedom and instead accept something called entitlements or rights and things like that. It gets all very convoluted, and that's the point. So anyways, I'm going to leave it off for there. Otherwise, I'll just keep adding stuff to this podcast. So if you appreciate this information, please like, subscribe, and share it with your network. Get the word across, because I'm being shadow banned everywhere. I'm watching magical math going on with any figures I can look at are bumping up and down like a yo-yo that make no sense. And I'm seeing different figures in different places. So I know there's some manipulation going on. So what's happening is the leftists who tend to run most websites and web-based sites and programs, they tend to get in there and they really hate the kind of stuff that I say, because they consider it hate speech. Anything that makes them uncomfortable because they're living a lie, they hate it. So they consider it hate speech, and they want to screw someone over. They want to diminish the reach. So they basically have this catchphrase. It's called free speech, but not free reach. So what they do is they silo you into this little hole, and you're in a little echo chamber. I interact with a very few people. The few people I interact with, I'm always interacting, and there are other activists as well. And we're basically talking to each other, and we're basically being cut off. It's like we're on an island and you can't reach the other people. So if you have the opportunity, please copy the links to this podcast and put it all through your social media to try to get other people to hear this information, because the more people that know, the more we can wake up, and the more en masse we can wake up, the more we can peacefully resolve this situation. If we don't resolve it peacefully, there's going to be an inflection point where we pass the point of no return, and the only way to straighten this thing out is going to be the other way. the unspeakable way, and we don't want to go there. So that's why if we can do this peacefully, just transition from stupid into wonderful, that'd be awesome. Otherwise, we're going to transition from stupid into democide, and we're going to have to resist like our lives depend on it, because our lives will actually depend on it. All right, I'm going to cut it off from there for now. Thanks for listening. God bless.